Good afternoon. Welcome to the 2021 Vangermeersch Endowed Lecture Series. The Vangermeersch Endowed Lecture was established in 2008 with a gift from URI College of Business alumnus Deborah Chalfie, who graduated in 1980, in honor of her former accounting professor, Richard Vangermeersch, who retired in 2004 after 34 years of teaching. The lecture series features prominent role models from the business community to interest and inspire our students. Professor Vangermeersch is here today, and we thank him for his many dedicated years of service to URI and to the College of Business. You can applaud now. I don't have the cue cards that I need, so thank you. I'm so excited to introduce this year's speaker, Richard Vevers. Richard Vevers is the founder and CEO of the Ocean Agency, headquartered at the URI Bay Campus. Before diving into ocean and coral reef conservation, Vevers first worked at some of the top London advertising agencies, and then as an artist and underwater photographer. It is this background that has guided his unique, creative, and business-thinking approach to ocean conservation. His imagery, revealing what is happening to our oceans, is some of the most viewed underwater imagery of all time. And his ideas, project, and public speaking have made him a leading voice in the fight to save coral reefs. His major successes include inventing the SVII camera and taking Google Street View underwater, pioneering virtual reality ocean education, currently available to over 90 million kids, the XL Caitlin Seaview Survey, the most comprehensive underwater photographic survey and record of coral reefs with over 1 million images captured and analyzed, revealing the crisis facing coral reefs in the Netflix original documentary Chasing Coral, 50 Reefs, a global scientific study to help target and inspire effective conservation support and action that resulted in $86 million in funding for leading science and conservation organizations. Please join me in welcoming Richard Vevers.
Thank you, and can you hear me well enough? It's great to be here, and I'm honored to be asked to do this lecture. And it's great to meet you, Richard. I wasn't expecting to meet you here. So yeah, we're based on the Bay Campus, and we're partnered with the University of Rhode Island. So it's great to be able to do this lecture here. I want to tell you a little bit about the Ocean Agency, which I've been set up 10 years ago, and to really focus on 3 projects where we really brought business skills in to help transform ocean conservation, and specifically around sort of coral reefs. But I also want to tell you sort of how that thinking can be brought into broader environmental impact, especially now. COP26 is happening as we speak, and there's certain learning that we can apply using business skills. And for me, this is a very exciting time to be in business. It's very different from when I was in advertising. And I want to tell you about some of those opportunities. And then I'm just going to finish off with some of the work that we're working on to give you an overview there. So this is where it all started. I was working in advertising in London, and we had this heated discussion about toilet tissue. It went through the night, and I decided that was it. I'd had enough. And I decided to walk out and became an underwater photographer. And this was my new sea change, which was totally unplanned. It was just one of those spur-of-the-moment decisions. I'd spent 10 years in advertising. I loved it at first, great people, really creative, but it then just started getting me down. I was sort of raising money essentially for these big companies and looking for ways to get people to buy things they didn't necessarily need. This was 4-ply toilet tissue that we were talking about rather than 3-ply toilet tissue. Does it matter? And I figured no. So I became an underwater photographer, and I learned the hard way that all my competitors as underwater photographers were independently wealthy. So I was at this distinct disadvantage, and I decided to sort of set up first a gallery, and then I got into painting and was trying to make a sort of living that way. But I started working with a lot of ocean conservation organizations and bringing some of my skills into that to sort of supplement my art income. And that's when I discovered there was so much going on in the ocean that I was totally unaware of. You know, just really vast problems, and yet I was a passionate diver and I didn't know about them. I'd only ever go and visit the good locations, not the bad locations. No one would take you there. And so you didn't know what was happening. And I saw this as an advertising issue. So I decided to set up the Ocean Agency. And the idea was to reveal the oceans to the world and really bring in those business skills into this area. And so the first project, we thought, well, one of the biggest challenges is the fact that 99.9% of people don't dive and probably will never dive. And so we decided what we needed to do was to sort of accelerate our ocean science and awareness through corporate sponsorship by taking Google Street View underwater. And so we invented the camera that was the equivalent to the underwater Street View camera. And the idea was we would then be able to go and reveal locations all around the world. And that's exactly what we did. You know, we went and revealed locations across the globe. You know, one of the first expeditions was Galapagos, and it was all paid for by a corporate sponsor. And we knew the project was going to have corporate appeal right from the outset. But it was about how we designed the camera to maximize that corporate sponsorship opportunity was the reason why we managed to sell it in. Now imagine a sports team, if it didn't have corporate sponsorship. You know, it would be applying for government grants to fund a lot of the activity. We know we can do a lot of things through corporate sponsorship, which changes the model of fundraising for science, for example. And that's where this project progressed. It wasn't just about getting imagery for Google and education programs. It was about getting imagery that could record an environment and be an accurate record of that environment. And so these are some of the images. It's a full 360 image, this, that wraps around itself, but really captures that environment and is an important historical record. Now, each one of these images has a GPS location, and we can go back and analyze it over time. And what we decided was we would turn this into a big scientific expedition to do this properly. And we got talking to Professor Ovo Gilberg at the University of Queensland, and he said there wasn't a global survey of coral reefs. No one was willing to pay for it. And we said, well, we've got the sponsorship model that could pay for that. And we raised over $10 million to do a global survey, 28 countries taking over 1 million images of the coral reefs. And the reason why we managed to get that money was we did treat them, the scientists, like a sports team. We made them wear the uniforms. Normally they'd be wearing their Hawaiian shirts going on cruises to take images of reefs, and no one wants to sponsor that. They've got to be wearing black in the tropics. And it was something that the scientists resisted initially, but when they saw the funding that allowed them to fast-track the science as a result of that sponsorship, it really made a difference. And then suddenly the media was interested, and philanthropists were interested, donating their mega yachts so that we could operate, because the whole project looked professional. It looked, it was appealing, and we got over 10,000 media articles about the project. This was one of the super yachts that was given to us to do the Great Barrier Reef, and it was one of the best experiences of my life. You've got your own sort of personal chefs cooking you meals in between. This is the way science should be done, and it's all paid for. And the company that paid for it actually made a profit. They got a 5-fold better return on investment than if they'd sponsored a football team, based on the average return on investment of sponsorship. So we were providing them something unique, something that showed that the company cared about the environment and did something really important at a fast-track pace. And that's what we spent 4 years doing, this global survey. And it gave us really interesting problems as we went along. Suddenly we had 1 million images, and normally it takes a scientist at least an hour to analyze an image. So we had to invent the software working with UC Berkeley that could analyze this to the same accuracy as a marine biologist, but in a fraction of the time and a fraction of the cost. And that, again, was all paid for by the sponsorship. And so this sponsorship model can be applied to a lot of science, I feel, if it is really designed well to appeal to sponsors. And that's all we need to do. Now, during this whole process, I suddenly fell in love with coral reefs. I'd never thought too much about them before, but they're amazing. This is an ecosystem that is the most biodiverse ecosystem on the planet. They build these cities that are dwarfing anything humans have ever built, with 1 million species. But the trouble with coral reefs is they are incredibly vulnerable to climate change. And it's not just climate change, it is also overfishing. It's also pollution. So it is the most biodiverse ecosystem on the planet, but it's the most vulnerable ecosystem on the planet. And climate change is really impacting coral reefs. It affects essentially their ability to feed. So they grow their own food in their flesh. These are the corals. And if the water temperature gets too warm, that food becomes toxic, they have to expel it, and then they bleach and they die. And so this is happening en masse, and that was one of the biggest issues, is we are seeing so much of this happening. But when we were doing the survey and I was finding out about this, I was finding out about it for the first time. I'd never really read it in any newspapers, I'd never seen it on the TV, and I couldn't believe how bad the situation was and that I didn't know about it. So that really led us on to the second project. And this is Chasing Coral. And this was absolutely about using creative PR to raise awareness about this issue. And with any company, one of the first things you look to do is raise awareness about your product or service through free publicity. It's much better than marketing because it's free. And so if you can, as a not-for-profit, you're always going to be short of money. You don't want to be marketing. You want to be really leveraging every PR opportunity possible. And so we had a look at the communication that was currently going out about bleaching. And there had been 2 global bleaching events, but they'd had very little media coverage. They were just called bleaching events, and this is the imagery that was released. And everyone goes, what's going on? No idea. And it's a bit of an ugly picture, so it'll go well into the publication if it makes the pages at all. And so we said, right, first thing we need to do is to get some epic imagery of what was happening. And that's what we did. We went and we chased bleaching events to look for imagery and to capture the scale of what was going on. And then we also worked with NOAA, so the US government, to do the announcement about the third global bleaching event. It wasn't going to be called the third global bleaching event because the scientists were trying to decide whether it was actually the third or the 5th global bleaching event. So no one wanted to put a number on it, but we said we've got to, because that will get the media interest. So they settled on the third global bleaching event, and that's the announcement we did with some really epic imagery of what was happening. This is an image from the Maldives where it was just stark white for as far as you could see. And this really made the headlines. We got over $100 million worth of free media because we had the imagery and we talked about this being the third global bleaching event. And all the media asked us, well, is this climate related if it's the third one? And why don't we know about the last 2? Why don't we know about this? So it really did make a lot of media attention. And we gave them the imagery that really showed what was happening. This is the transformation in American Samoa. We went and got the images before we knew it was going to hit, and we got the images while it was hitting to show that transformation. And I was particularly pleased about this one. Leonardo tweeted this one out, and that transformation. So you can get out to huge audiences just by having imagery and telling the story well. And it made front page news. This is one of my images from the Great Barrier Reef that we took. And it's so important getting that imagery that tells a story, but it's got to be interesting. It's got to be engaging to make it there. It can't just be the science. And we decided we would tell the full story. We told it from all sorts of angles, so showing the destruction after the bleaching. This was the Great Barrier Reef after it had been bleached, and then very quickly that reef dies. We lost 50% of the corals on the Great Barrier Reef during this third global bleaching event. And this is what you saw. But the story that The Guardian ran here and then was covered with lots of other publications it was about the smell. This is dying animals, and when you get out of the water, you smell it on yourself. And you can smell it from a distance, and it told that story of what was happening. And so it's another angle. So it didn't just need to be the really sort of epic bleaching images. We can tell the full story. And we also did a sort of partnership with Time magazine to tell the story, and really revealing what was happening in terms of there's this phenomenon called fluorescing. And normally corals, so they just turn white, but sometimes they can turn these incredible colors. Not normally this bright. This was something that we recorded in New Caledonia. We heard it was happening, so we flew straight out there and got this imagery, and no one's ever sort of recorded imagery that shows coral fluorescing in this sort of, these colors. This is the yellow that the corals turned, and it was actually emitting light. What they're doing here is they're producing a chemical sunscreen that protects them from the sun, but their flesh has turned clear, so you're seeing this kind of the white skeleton through the yellow, the bright pigment, and it's just the most stunning colors you'll ever see. And Time magazine called it, nature's most beautiful death. And we gave them the imagery to tell that story. And it got a lot of coverage. But, I soon realized that you needed to do more than just work with publications. People can read a story, but they don't get emotionally attached. And I saw a film which was Chasing Ice, which was directed by Jeff Orlowski. And it's an incredible film. And I felt emotionally attached to glaciers disappearing. And I felt if he could do that job with glaciers, he could do a phenomenal job with coral reefs when it's 1 million species. And that's what he did. He followed us for about 3 years with his team, and we produced Chasing Coral. And it was a far bigger success than I'd ever hoped. I didn't even imagine that I was going to be in the film when we started this process. But he got in the right kind of team to make this work. And it was about sort of Zach, who was sort of the main star of the film, where you felt emotionally attached to his story, his personal journey, seeing coral reefs go through what they went through. And that powerful storytelling is what really engages people and gets them to want to act. And it's certainly a learning experience for me. Interestingly enough, initially, Zach wasn't going to be in the film. Jeff would sit me down pretty much each week and try and make me cry on camera. But I wouldn't, because I'm British and we're not allowed to. So he decided he needed another character that could tell the emotional story and then get people sort of really engaged with the film. And that's been the big success. It's been seen by about 100 million people, and it's really had sort of dramatic effect in terms of interest in this story. Now, it's really about climate action and protecting coral reefs to save coral reefs, and which is the same story for the ocean as a whole. The ocean, coral reefs are just a symbol of what's happening in the ocean. But you need those two things. We need 30% protection of the ocean, 30% protection of coral reefs, and we need climate action, and we need it to happen quickly. For coral reefs, if we go beyond 1.5 degrees centigrade global temperature rise, we will lose 90% of the remaining coral reefs. And that's at 1.5. So if it goes any further than that, At 2 degrees, we lose 99% of coral reefs. So it's really a race against time to save what we can. But then there's all the other impacts, the pollution and the overfishing. So we need to protect and buy resilience in the areas that matter most. So we decided to come up with a project which was to do that. There wasn't a global plan to save coral reefs against climate change, and we decided to make a controversial one. So this was 50 reefs, and the idea was, there wasn't any real investment in saving coral reefs. So we thought of it like a business. How do you attract a good investor for your business? Let's treat coral reefs as a business. The investors don't know where they should invest their money. It's very confusing. There's lots of people saying, okay, spend money on our coral restoration project, but it's not necessarily in the right location. Is it good value? Is it likely to succeed? This is the information that we don't provide people who want to invest. And so we wanted to make it easy. So the idea was to come up with a plan for investors. And we said, there's limited funds available. We can only save 50. This is the perfect portfolio of 50. And we got the leading scientists in the world to get together, and they came up with this list. And they actually used modern portfolio theory. So the algorithm that is used normally to pick shares. So this manages your risk. So it makes the risk manageable while maximizing your gains. And it selected 50 sites. And we also had a few bonus sites, which were ones that didn't make that list, but would be great investments. And it resulted in one of the biggest philanthropic donations ever to coral reef conservation. 86 million was pledged to coral reef conservation in those 50 reef sites that we identified from Michael Bloomberg, because he understood the investment. He didn't have to think about it. This was a managed portfolio that we put in front of him, and he spent the money bolstering conservation in those key areas with organizations like WWF and Oceana, the experts in bolstering conservation experts in those areas. And we even went out to visit those locations that it selected, and these are some of the best reefs I've ever seen. Stunning, stunning reefs which are less vulnerable to climate change. Really important for reseeding other reefs, and it's where we should be bolstering our efforts. A lot of these reefs are something like 40 years less vulnerable than the most vulnerable reefs because of cooler water flushing through, high currents. They're on the equator where you've got a cloud cover. They don't get the storm activity. Lots of different variables, which is why these locations were selected. But it gives you hope for coral reef conservation and allows us to target our conservation efforts. The challenge is the scale. When you look at a $86 million donation, it pales into insignificance compared with the $375 billion that coral reefs basically contribute towards the global economy each year. We need to be thinking far bigger than sort of small scale, relatively small scale investments in these areas. And so when you take a step back and get really close to these issues, it's really difficult as an environmentalist to see progress, especially in ocean conservation. There's been a real problem in ocean conservation in the fact that it attracts 0.2% of philanthropic funding. People don't know about the issues in the ocean. It's out of sight and out of mind, and we simply don't have anywhere near the investment that's needed to tackle the issues. So ocean conservation generally isn't working, and the issues are spiraling way, way ahead of us. They're escalating and they're escalating, and climate change is really causing major damage in the ocean, where 93% of the heat from climate change is being absorbed, and people aren't seeing it, and we're not doing much about it. So it's easy to see why environmentalists, and I'm not just talking about ocean environmentalists, I'm talking about environmentalists in general, are getting quite despondent. It's very easy to be jaded in this area. And you've only got to look at some of the signs at COP22 this week. I actually like this one. I'm freaking terrified for our future. And people are getting angry. But I want to show you sort of the optimism story here. You are getting all this anger, but millennials and younger are changing everything. And it's being driven by business. You are getting 9 out of 10 millennials say they will switch a brand for a cause, and brands are waking up to this. They're very aware of the situation. They know they will not be able to attract employees. They know they won't be able to attract shareholders. They know they won't be able to keep their employees. And they need to be getting involved in not just becoming sustainable. That doesn't cut it anymore, especially with the younger generation. It's all about now doing good. And so they're the companies that have the brightest future. And it's changing my outlook in terms of what's possible. Doing good is now good for business. I had a midlife crisis because I felt I wasn't doing any good in advertising, because there wasn't the option. You had the choice of you either work for a charity or you work for business. And they were poles apart. They're not poles apart anymore. They are coming together. And that's where the opportunity lies. And the other thing is, the future has never been so predictable. When I was in advertising, you never knew what was around the corner, and it was hard to plan. It's easy to plan now. There are trillions of dollars being invested to solve the issues which we know are going to happen. We know where the world is going, and that is a huge business opportunity for people that see it. And it's the innovators that will solve this problem, not the sort of usual suspects, the conservation organizations. As an entrepreneur, you were always sort of taught, okay, problems are really opportunities in disguise. And we are now presented with arguably the biggest problem we've ever faced. The scientific name for climate change is a super wicked problem. There are wicked problems, which are evolving problems, which are very, very difficult to solve, especially through logic. And then there's this super wicked problem, which I love the name, super wicked, for climate change. And so this is a super wicked opportunity for people that want to see it this way. Hopefully. And there are guides now for people getting in business. And I can't think of a better time to be in a business school than now. There is this huge opportunity of not just being successful in business, but being successful and doing a huge amount of world-changing good. And there are guides for how to make a success. This is a book which should be the Bible for budding entrepreneurs. It's the Drawdown Project, and it's 100 ideas for how you can solve climate change. And it lists them in order of importance. And there will be billions of dollars put against each one of these solutions. And so you've only got to have a look and see which you are interested in and tackle that issue, because governments will make money available to help solve this, and people will want to invest in that product. I'll just give you one example of this, which is kind of an ocean-related one, and I love this image. Someone's discovered, there's been a big talk in the media this week about 100 countries signing up to reduce methane. One of the biggest causes of methane is cattle. There are 100 million cows in America alone, and they're giving off a lot of methane. And they discovered, just by supplementing 5% of their diet with seaweed, cuts it by at least 50%. And so overnight, you can transform what is a problem into much less of a problem, and it's a business opportunity. The average cow eats 50 pounds of food a day. That's a lot of seaweed that needs to be produced, and there will be subsidies to get that out to the farmers and really grow that business quickly if you're first to market. So seeing these opportunities as they come up and coming up with innovative solutions is just, there are hundreds and hundreds of billionaire ideas out there. And it will be those innovators that make such a big difference. Now, For me, climate change is almost the easier part. This is what people understand. There's high awareness, there's lots of enthusiasm about solutions, and there's lots of money being available. Of course, I chose ocean conservation, which is completely the opposite. There's very low awareness. People don't even know that it's related to climate change, and they don't understand the issues going on. That's why they announced that it was the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, to really raise awareness about the issues going on in the ocean and to dramatically increase funding in this area. We need something like a 10-fold increase in funding for ocean science and conservation in the next 10 years to make a real impact. And the problem is a business problem again. Over the last few decades, the image of ocean science and ocean conservation especially has been really bad, and it's put people off. You know, it's either been sort of almost naive or it's been very negative. All the stories about the oceans, when you look at it, they're generally really negative, and people don't want to read them. You know, they're not interested, so they don't listen to find out what's going on in the oceans. And that's one of the biggest issues that we have, is this image of the ocean is really bad. Ocean science arguably is no better. You look at the imagery of ocean science, and often it just communicates what's going on, rather than what people need to see to invest in the science. There is some great science going out, but it's not being communicated in the way that people want to invest in it and want to support it. And we need to change that before we're going to get to the solutions. We need to change the image of the ocean. You compare it to space, and space got it right in the first place. There was enough investment that they spent money on the image early on, and suddenly you've got now a situation where space exploration gets 100 times the funding of ocean exploration. Yet our lives are all dependent on the ocean and the health of the ocean, and it doesn't make any logical sense. And that's when you kind of realize that we're not a logical species. We are very much an illogical species, but space got it so right, and it's getting better all the time. You look at Elon Musk and SpaceX, and the amount of attention that goes into the imagery, it gets people wanting to go to space, and selling space tourism when the planet is failing, which is an interesting concept. And this is the point, we are not a logical species, and this is what you learn in advertising. It's the first thing you learn in advertising. People don't buy on logic. You can tell them all the logical things, but you don't buy on logic. You buy because the person next to you is buying. You buy because you're emotionally attached, and you don't know why you want to buy. I love the story of Coke versus Pepsi. And there was a study done, which was a blindfold study, and everyone preferred Pepsi, but everyone went out and bought Coke. Even though they knew they preferred Pepsi, they wanted to be associated with Coke. And it was just good branding. It was the colour. It was all sorts of things that made you want to buy a product that was one you preferred less than another product. And it's that kind of branding that is so important. Another good example is the Apple phone. Going from an Apple phone 12 to a 13, there's no logical reason why you would spend 1% of your annual salary doing that. It's a phone, it's identical to all intents and purposes, but for some reason you've got this desire to do it, and you want to do it. And that is the Apple brand. That's the story they've told. That makes you feel socially acceptable. It's a reward for yourself. They've built that. And you are an emotional creature, and that's how we behave if we are communicated in certain ways. You look at the story, I love the original logo of Apple. This was designed by the founders, and they weren't very good. And they soon realized that they probably needed to improve their logo if they were going to be a success. And that's when kind of the logo went on this evolution and to create that brand. It takes a long time to create the brand, but once you do, it can be worth $1 trillion. that original brand no one wanted to buy. So we need to do this for the ocean. And this is our next ridiculously ambitious project, the Ocean Decade. So working with UNESCO and Adobe to accelerate ocean conservation through brand building. Now, we can't do it on our own, obviously, but what we wanted to do was to seed this idea and to get it out there to see if we can get the creative community involved in helping rebrand the ocean and ocean science and ocean conservation. We started off with just a simple poster competition, and we took a trick from NASA. We said NASA was great at using this old style of retro illustration, and it almost universally looks cool. Everyone thinks it looks cool. And that's the simple techniques you use to sort of help rebrand a subject rather than the imagery you're used to seeing. And then we got the creative community involved. We teamed up with Adobe to task them to take the 7 principles about ocean illiteracy. So these have been developed by UNESCO. This is the 7 things absolutely everyone should know about the ocean, and bring them to life creatively. And that's what we've been doing, is using this imagery to really get you to stop, think, question what's going on here, and then ask yourself, why didn't I know some of these points that I should understand? The fact that the ocean is fundamental to life. It is fundamental to everything. It's fundamental to solving climate change. We need to get back to the basics and rebrand the ocean to even get there. And we've been having some fun creatively. This is some stunning work. We are taking this to the UN Ocean Conference. We're growing this project over time, and it's becoming an educational program, using creativity to educate around this subject matter, rather than the usual imagery that you associate with depressing ocean. And it's about perceptions. For government, it's about the perception of popular support for action. It doesn't need to be the reality. So all you need to do is surround the policymakers, and there's only a few of them, at the key decision-making moments. So that's what we're doing at the moment, is working on getting enough people showing support for ocean protection, which we will then showcase at the key events, along with the big petition statistics, working with other organisations. One project we're working with the University of Rhode Island on is just a hero project for the Ocean Decade. This is a surveying camera, but rather than just develop a camera that is good at surveying, let's make it look cool. So we've designed it around the hammerhead shark concept. It is state-of-the-art in terms of what it can achieve, but it's got media appeal. And that's kind of the secret to getting media attention around sort of ocean science. One interesting story sort of just on this was, when you get businesses involved in these issues, they tackle it in such a different way from conservation organisations. Now, we've been trying to restore coral reefs for a number of years as conservationists and had very, very limited success. Something like 90% of the corals planted die, and you don't see a great recovery generally. Often they're located in locations where they've got money. So there's philanthropists that are local, but it's the areas which are most vulnerable. So they don't, again, they're not likely to survive. This was a reef that we went and photographed out in Indonesia, which was being restored by Mars, as in the confectionery company. And they decided to put their factory manager on trying to restore a reef. And this was what it looked like 3 years earlier. And he just took the business approach. He said, what's the fastest, cheapest way I can get corals in the water that grow and will survive? And he took a very, very different approach from the conservation organisations. The conservation organisations generally were sending 2 divers, which were coming from other countries. They were putting down corals and cementing them to the ocean floor. It was costing about $50 a coral to put a coral down. And we need so many, you can't even imagine. We're talking about Great Barrier Reef being the size of Italy. You're not going to have a real impact at that scale. So what they did was work with local fishing communities, providing an alternative income, so it takes the pressure off, And then they were seeding coral fragments onto these structures. And they tested this, but unlike a conservation organization, which would normally test the process once or twice and then find the model to run with, they did it 100 times and then another 100 times, working out the exact sand that needs to coat the structures to make the corals grow fastest. Making it's one single rebar that's cut to the optimum shape to save money. There is no waste in the process. And it's all about getting the right labor in the right location so it's going to survive and be affordable. So their cost was 1/10 of any other conservation organization, just by applying business tactics. And that's why business skills are so needed in ocean conservation. And this is them just installing a reef, and it's all structured together, and it grows phenomenally quickly. And it's certainly very encouraging when you see that. The last project that I want to talk about, which we've started talking about with the business school, this would be a fun project to collaborate on, is Super Wicked. And this is really around climate action through brand building. It's about positioning climate action as positive, as an opportunity. And it's an opportunity to improve your life. So we're working on kind of this little book of Super Wicked ideas, ways that you can make the most of the climate crisis, rather than seeing it just as about giving up this, giving up that, which is never going to work. It wasn't working. At the moment, we position climate action as if we need to counter human behavior, when we actually need to work with human behavior if we're going to get the progress at the speed that we need. And so that's why we love being here, because what we need to do right now is think big. And there is this unique opportunity and the funding available to really think big. So thank you. Yes, Richard.
Yeah, I had the thrill of going a few times to the Jules Verne Museum in Nantes, in France. And if anyone could do it, a modern-day Jules Verne could. Have you been to the museum, the Jules Verne Museum?
I haven't been to the museum, but one of my favorite images is Nautilus underwater, done in that retro illustrative style. It was all about that storytelling. And
but the French used comic strips so well that it is absolutely a thrill to be at that museum, to see what can be done, especially with children. Children are just fascinated with the characters of Jules Verne. So what is needed is a modern-day Jules Verne concept.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, we used to be good at communicating the ocean. People used to be excited about it. It was more exciting than space. We've lost that, and we need to get it back. And there's formulas, there's proven methods for doing that.
So as a scuba diver who loves coral reefs, I want to thank you for what you're doing to save them, because they're beautiful to look at, not touch, but swim over. Earlier in your talk, you spoke about a company that invested and got 5 times the benefit than they would have in a sports team. Can you just drill into that a little more? I'm interested in how that plays out.
So it was an insurance company. It was Catlin, which was the largest company in Lloyd's of London. It's a rebroker mainly, but they wanted to expand into the US market. So what we had was a project that was very high profile. So we gave them the name. So the Catlin Seaview Survey became the name, and we had their logo on everything. So we were targeted, our KPI really was about getting their name into certain publications with stories around ocean risk. So they were the insurance company that understood what was happening with the ocean, and we managed to do that. We got over 10,000 media articles, and most of it covered their name and the fact that this was an insurance company that was interested in ocean risk. And interestingly, the journalists were more likely to write the article because we had an insurance company involved. Because they went, if an insurance company is interested in this, it must be a problem. So it certainly helped us to have them on board. They've since been taken over by AXA, and they're carrying on with this work through various means. Yeah, I mean, the small actions do matter. We have a little bit of a different approach to the Ocean Agency because in ocean conservation, you normally have to go for the issues where there's funding. Ocean plastics is a great, great story because it was an issue that was not an issue. You know, the scientists weren't that concerned. We then had more and more conservationists getting involved, but then it became a really big issue. And it was really when sort of the celebs got involved, the businesses got involved, and it suddenly became mainstream because you had the creative community get involved around this issue because it was something you felt that you could have an impact on in the ocean, which feels like no one can really make much of an impact. But for me, it gave me hope because you saw an issue go from zero funding to billions of dollars of funding to solve this issue almost overnight because it suddenly went from being an environmentalist issue to a mainstream issue. And if we can do the same for oceans as a whole, that's where we need to be. And yes, ocean plastics is a serious problem, but it is not to the scale of most of the other issues in the ocean. Losing coral reefs is a planetary scale ecosystem, and it's happening really, really rapidly. I would look at, we just need to prioritize our actions, but every action is very important. But I think we need to also make it so that it feels achievable, what we do. It needs to be realistic. We shouldn't be saying everyone needs to stop going on holidays. For example, that's not going to be a solution. People are always going to go. So we need to find solutions and just make it so that we position it in such a way so you save up and go on one holiday rather than 5. This is the progress that I feel that needs to be made.
Hi. So coming from a past life in the nonprofit world working to save Antarctica, I love your message. But also as a mom of a 6-year-old, are you guys looking to the future of how we hit our students today, the little ones, the ones that in 20, 30, 40 years, when we're looking at that time frame now, how are we involving them to change their mindset to think about this conservation, to go along with your vision? Have you guys even approached that yet?
And this is one of the drivers for Super Wicked. I've got a coming up to 2-year-old born at the start of the pandemic, and I'm quite frightened about the rhetoric I'm hearing. I'm hearing angry, and I'm hearing sort of almost panic about the environment. It's been ruined by people like me in advertising, making people buy stuff that they didn't need. And it is turning into a situation where it's getting almost toxic, and you're hearing the levels of eco-anxiety. I don't want that for my daughter. So people need to start looking at this as being solvable. They need to see it as the opportunity. There are the innovators out there that can solve this. And we've got to make people realize that there is, climate action is about being healthier. It's about being wealthier. It's about, improving your life. There's almost nothing about climate action that doesn't benefit you personally, if you think of it that way. But we're all taught that it's about giving up everything that your parents have enjoyed all their lives, and we've got to give it up. It's that kind of rhetoric that needs to change and needs to happen quickly. And I do believe you can have a generation that grows up optimistic and actually sees this as a positive challenge as opposed to a negative, transformation of my life, which is unfair.
So as an accounting professor, so involved with business, there's an accounting professor's endowed in his name lecture. Also as a swimmer who swam with one of those Mickey whales that you had a photo of on the screen. I am concerned about conveying good information to those investors. So you mentioned investors in companies and having that support from companies for focused on the most potentially productive investments. There's a trade-off between greenwashing and reporting and sustainability reporting that's done and an accurate measure. Are you working on getting that? I thought that portfolio risk management approach. Are you working on getting that in front of companies for their strategies that they can also help to convey best to investors? Can you comment on that? Any work that you've done or
Yeah.
you know we've done here?
Yeah, it's less about us. I mean, we're not experts in this, and what we do is we tend to work with the experts as much as we can. TNC, so the Nature Conservancy, tends to be sort of the leader in this area, with some great scientists. With ocean, getting the investments there is difficult. You look at coral reefs, for example, they're starting to insure. You can't really create opportunities unless you get insurance involved. And they're starting to insure reefs because of the protection for coastlines. So when they get impacted, there is money there to help rebuild that reef to protect the structure on land. All these kind of models can be created, but it needs a lot of data, a lot of science. We're not investing enough in the science is the problem. So I do think we are starting to get to the numbers that then suddenly make investments attractive, but we've still got a long, long way to go. And totally agree that it all comes down to the numbers.
And communicating those in a positive way, though, as well, and not going too far with that.
Exactly.
Some are accused of doing at this point.
Yep.
Yeah. Do you have any College of Business student interns in your shop?
We've got a couple of interns that are working with us, but not from the College of Business yet. And certainly, we're very keen to sort of get more business minds involved.
It would be a great internship project for graduate students, undergraduate students.
Yeah, I mean, I love the idea of sort of the super wicked doing the research. So, for example, for males, you become more attractive to females generally if you are acting sustainably. So it's a reason to act sustainably even if you don't want to. So all this, having that science that says why this climate action is going to benefit you, that's the kind of research that we need doing. There's 100 of stories like that. Well, when I set up the Ocean Agency, I actually got some people from my old advertising sort of industry involved. So we set up as there was originally 3 of us that got the ball rolling. And then it was just being confident enough to pick up the phone to Google and say we're going to take Google Street View underwater, which they'd incidentally been trying for 2 years unsuccessfully. And for us, kind of without any experience, saying, oh, yes, we knew how to design the camera. We'd never taken an underwater 360 camera. So you've got to be sort of good at pitching and confident enough to think, well, once we land this, then we can actually deliver. But that's about then finding the right people who can deliver what you've promised. But that's all sort of social entrepreneurism.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. And Richard, thank you so much. What a fabulous talk.
Thank you.
He's offered his email if anyone has any further questions.